Hello everyone, my name is Christian. Welcome back to Tekpon. Today our guest is Omeed, the coolest ever lawyer for SaaS. Thank you for joining us, Omeed.
Thanks, Christian. Thanks for having me.
First of all, please tell us what you do and how you help SaaS companies.
Sure. Yeah, so as you mentioned, I'm the coolest lawyer ever, but outside of that, how I help SaaS companies is I'm a corporate lawyer. So there's four specific areas that I help SaaS businesses with. The first area is
Okay.
starting their business. So if a SaaS
Mm-hmm.
founder has an idea and they want to start their business, I help them form their companies. So that's the first place that I help SaaS founders with. So when they form their companies,
Okay.
they form a C corp in Delaware, and then they need to sign some contracts and have some compliance documents, and I help them with those things: terms of service, privacy policy, that sort of thing. Then from there, I
Right.
help founders that are scaling their business. So let's say they want to close an enterprise customer, and they need some sort of like master services contract with that enterprise customer. I help draft and negotiate that contract so that they can close that enterprise customer, and so they can start generating revenue from that enterprise customer. From there, if they want to raise money, I help them with the process of drafting and negotiating their venture capital contracts. And then the last
Okay.
thing is when they want to sell their business, I help them with the process of selling their business. So I draft and negotiate the contracts related to selling the business. I help them with due diligence. I help them navigate the process of negotiating with the other side's lawyers so that they can sell their business and make money from the acquisition. So those are the four areas that I primarily help SaaS businesses with.
So basically, as a SaaS founder, no matter where you're at, you need Omeed in your life, right?
Exactly. That's right.
Amazing. And is it only for SaaS, the services that you offer?
So I choose to focus on SaaS just because that's the area that I find most interesting, that I find most passionate. But I mean, I've worked with all different kinds of businesses. I've worked with hardware companies. I've worked with Fortune 500 companies. I've worked with service companies. But for the most part, I prefer to work on SaaS businesses because I've been in the software space for 10 years now, and that's just what I know best. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's take the first part of what you do. So you help founders establish their company into the US in Delaware.
That's correct.
What are the things that a founder should know before starting the process, and why uh, he or she need to come to your
Yeah.
services?
Yeah. Great question. So let's say let's cover two instances. The first instance is a SaaS founder who lives in the United States and they have an idea for a SaaS business. Often the question that I'll
Hmm.
get is, oh, when should I start this business? Some people will say,
Yes.
don't create the entity until you have your first customer. Other people will say, before you do anything, start the entity. So there's various different ways that people think about this. And the whole idea is you don't want to spend money on creating a company if you go to launch the company and then you never generate any revenue. And so some people will say, oh, don't start the actual company until you actually are making money and you know that the business is going to obtain customers. And I, see that there's some validity to that. So I definitely understand why people would say that. But I think that if you are building a product, you're investing in bringing the product. It's actually more a question of how committed are you to the business? If this is something that you know that you want to work on for the next 5, 10 years, and you're willing to go through the difficulty of breaking into the market, and you don't care how long it takes you to get the customer, I think if you 100% know that this is a business that you're going to work on for the next 5 to 10 years, you should absolutely start an entity. That's when as soon as you start, you should start an entity, because you are going to be working with a developer, for example. You need to make sure that you have a contract with your developer. Or let's say you have a co-founder. You're the sales founder. He's the technical co-founder. He or she is the technical co-founder. You absolutely need to make sure that there is an agreement between the two of you, and that needs to happen very early in the process. So to answer your question, when should people start their entity? I think when they 100% know that this is a business that they want to work on for an extended period of time is really when they should start the entity. And especially if there's a co-founder or you're working with any people, if you've promised anyone equity or anything like that, all those things need to be in writing. And so you're going to need an actual company started in the United States in Delaware. And just a point of clarification, I help people start companies other places as well. So, I could help people start companies in California or New York, but Delaware is the chosen place for starting companies because that's just where most investors know, and it's like the most company friendly state in the United States. So that's all.
Yes, absolutely. What are some things that founders don't know and should know before starting a company, or some wrong expectations, some experiences that you had?
Yeah. So
for example, some founders may think it will take 3 months to start, or anything that you can share.
Sure. Yeah. So, starting a company can take like less than 24 hours in Delaware. So definitely not 3 months. If your lawyer takes 3 months, like that is not good. And yeah, it definitely does not take 3 months. So, other things that founders get wrong about starting a company, I think the thing that I see the most and the biggest liability for founders who have a co-founder is not getting some sort of agreement in place between co-founders. And what I've seen time and time again is two founders will start to work together, and then working with someone is just very challenging. So either I'll just share a couple of the instances, maybe 2 or 3 of the instances that I often see when two founders start their business. One instance is one person is very committed to the business, and they're putting in 40, 60, 80 hours a week on working on the business, and the other founder doesn't put in as much time as that founder who's working so hard for the business. Maybe the other founder does absolutely nothing for the business. Another instance that I see is two founders, they'll start working together, and then they'll maybe realize that they don't work together well. Maybe they were friends, maybe they had a relationship, but then once they start working together, they notice that their working styles are very different, and now they don't necessarily want to work together anymore. And oftentimes what happens between them is they'll have some sort of agreement with respect to equity. And so it'll be like, okay, we're going to start working together. We're going to launch this company. You'll get 50% equity and I'll get 50% equity. But if you just started working together and it's only been, 3 months, 6 months, and the person does zero work for the company, then they shouldn't get 50% equity in the company. The 50% equity in the company is based on the understanding that, hey, we're partners. We're going to work together for a long time into the future. And if there isn't a written agreement for founders around this point specifically, oftentimes what happens is the other founder will say, hey, if you don't give me this 50%, I'll sue you. And so people have had to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars sometimes to give the other founder equity, the equity that they talked about, even though that founder didn't do any work. And so the co-founder agreement is probably one of the most important things that people really overlook. So I think that's something that founders, sometimes maybe don't know or overlook.
And now let's get to the next step, fundraising.
Yeah.
What are some lessons that you saw there? Do you help founders raise funds from VCs only, or also angels and other forms of?
Yeah, so definitely help them raise with angels. So you know, very experienced with the safe note, for example, the simple agreement for future equity, which is the form that Y Combinator made some years ago. It's become the standard in the software tech space, and so oftentimes people will ask me, "Oh, how do you help founders raise capital?" Because when I tell people that I help founders raise capital, they think what I mean is that like I'll help them identify the investor or like meet investors, so that I'll make introductions to investors.
Yeah.
But that's actually not how I typically help founders raise capital. That's not the part of the process that founders come to me to help them with. The part of the process that founders come to me to help them with is once they have identified an investor and they already have some understanding, maybe they've had some discussion of terms, or they've at least identified that the investor is interested and wants to invest in the company, I will work on the contract to help that founder secure the investment. So, I think the easiest way to understand what I do is if it has to do with a contract, you can definitely come to me because that's what I help with. But some things that founders get wrong about investment, especially like early stage investors, not so much, if you're at Series B level, definitely this is not, or even Series A level, this is definitely not something that you'll necessarily get wrong. But specifically for the early stage founders, I think focusing too much on raising venture capital, maybe making venture capital their business model, for example, identifying investors that can only provide money and nothing else. There's no strategic alignment with that investor. For example, that investor doesn't have like enterprise contacts, or or maybe the values are just out of alignment with the investor. Maybe the investor, like, first of all, like the question that I always often ask founders is like, do you like the investor? Like, is the investor someone that you actually like, that you would want to go to dinner with, that you would want to spend time with? Because that relationship is a lot like a marriage. So those are just a few of the things. And then from a contract perspective, the three primary things are valuation. Like, can you and the investor agree on a valuation that makes sense for your company? The second thing that founders need to know about the contracts, the second most important provision in the contract is something called a liquidation preference. A liquidation preference says when I sell the company, the investor's return is going to be, some multiple of whatever their investment was. So if they invested 100x, or if they invested 100,000 and liquidation preference is 1x, then they will get 100,000 back. If it's 2x, they'll get 200,000 back. So you can see how liquidation preference is incredibly important for investments, because it impacts the exit in terms of how much money you have to pay back to that investor, and ultimately how much money you yourself get. So people can mess it up pretty bad. And then the third provision is anti-dilution. And in the early stages, you really shouldn't even be seeing that in the contract. So oftentimes I'll have founders come to me and the investor is, asking for a provision like anti-dilution, and that's just a hard no. So for all the founders out there, just remember that.
What is that?
Yeah, so anti-dilution essentially says, for the investor, I'm going to invest in your company, and I'm going to invest a certain amount, and I'm going to get a certain price per share. And I want to make sure that my interest in the company stays at a certain level, and I want to make sure that the price per share that I get, that no one will get a lower price per share than me. So it protects against down rounds. If they get a lower price per share, essentially the anti-dilution will kick in, and they will have new shares issued to them to protect against these down rounds that happen.
Okay, makes total sense. But it's mostly to protect investors, right?
Yes, it is. Yeah, a very investor-friendly protection.
Makes sense. But for every founder that wants to get into more details, they should reach out to you and talk directly. Here we just discussed the basics for anybody to understand. And I love to know how you started your career in this in this industry. You basically work like a fractional lawyer, right? So with
Yeah,
multiple startups at the same time.
that's correct. Yeah. So I'm a fractional general counsel, fractional out lawyer for SaaS businesses who work specifically on contracts. And I got my start in my career, like I said, about 10 years ago. I was recruited by a mentor to work for one of Elon Musk's ideated companies. So um, there was a
Okay.
company in 2015. It was called Hyperloop. And
Yes.
Hyperloop was like a super fast train. It went in a tube, and I worked at the Hyperloop company that actually had Richard Branson on its board of directors, and so there was like two or three different Hyperloop companies, and I worked for the Hyperloop company that was called Hyperloop One, and then it became Virgin Hyperloop One, and I started as employee number 68, and I helped them grow over the course of about 2 years to over 300 employees. We raised over $150 million, and it was just like really exciting. Like tech and startups and
Yeah.
software is very exciting, and it's exciting because it's like move fast. The culture that's created inside of a company, everyone like working towards the same goal. It's just like so different than any other area of business. And so I became obsessed. I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. And then I launched two of my own software companies as well. So I launched an AI computer vision company, and then I launched a marketplace. And that was as a result of like this experience that I had at Hyperloop, because I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. So I wanted to be a founder myself, because I, saw people at this tech company, and I was like, whoa, being a founder is like the coolest thing I've ever experienced. And I was like, I want to experience that. And I was like, I totally could do that. So then I launched two software companies, and I learned that it's incredibly hard. Founders make it look easy. It's not. It's not like you just launch and make money and get rich. It's
People
not
come.
that way.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work, and even then, you can put in all the work, and still that sometimes will mean that you won't necessarily succeed. There are a lot of different variables and factors, and so I have a lot of respect for SaaS founders. But so I launched two software companies of my own. I worked in house at a number of other companies, and then I worked with some of the top accelerators in the world, like Plug and Play and 500 Startups, Draper University, SaaS Academy, and then about 2 years ago, I started my own law firm. So that's a little bit about my
Amazing journey.
journey.
And
Yeah.
and from all of this experience, what would be your best piece of advice for a starting founder?
Yeah, my best piece of advice um, is, I think what's most important for founders out there is the startup journey is going to be incredibly difficult, as I mentioned, and no matter what you do, it's going to be difficult. But what makes it 10 times more difficult is not loving what you do. Because if you don't love what you do, then when it gets hard, there's going to be questions like, why am I doing this? Should I be doing this? If it's not something that you're passionate about, and I actually know this because I experienced this, like one of the startups that I started because like I thought that it was going to make me a millionaire, for example. Like I started the company because I was like, oh yeah, this company is going to make me rich. And so I want to do this. But then when things got very hard, as they would, I had a lot of doubts. I had a lot of questions. But if it's something that I love, and if it's something that even if I wasn't making money, I know that I'm going to do this for the next 10 years, no matter what, no matter how difficult it gets, I will endure the difficulty because I love doing this.
Exactly.
So I think that it's incredibly important for founders to be very passionate about what they do. And then the other piece of that too is surround yourself with people who feed that passion, who you feel a connection to. Like make that a part of your values. And that should even be your lawyer. Like I think a lot of people think
Yes.
about their lawyer and they think that it has to be, this person who maybe they don't like him, maybe, he's an asshole or something like that. It doesn't have to be that way. The point is that if you surround yourself with people that you love being around, when things get difficult, if you love your team, if you love the people that you work with, it just makes the journey like a whole lot more enjoyable.
I love this piece of advice. Thank you so much, Omeed. It was fantastic, and I totally agree. This should be heard by everyone. Now, I'm really keen to learn your favorite SaaS tools that you use in your day-to-day, and a tool that you'd recommend to other people.
Yeah, I don't know if I could recommend it to other people because it's a legal tool.
Okay.
Yeah, it's called Clio, and Clio. What's interesting about Clio is they actually set a record. It was like one of the biggest exits in the legal tech space. So we just saw EvenUp, which is another SaaS tool, get a $1 billion valuation, which is another legal SaaS tool. So the legal SaaS market is really heating up, but Clio is a super cool tool because it empowers small law firms with practice and case management. And so before Clio, a lot of the tools that were out there just weren't that great. And so Clio has really improved capabilities of small law firms to do things like track cases, collect payments, that sort of thing. And I love it. It like has made my life so easy. And whenever people ask me like, oh, what kind of tool should I use for my law firm? I'm always like, Clio, use Clio. So yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Last part, I want to talk about your podcast. So I know you also run a podcast, right?
Yes, that's right. It's called SaaS Buyers Club. And go ahead.
No, that's all. I want to hear about it.
Cool. Yeah, I'll be happy to tell you about it. So SaaS Buyers Club, it's a podcast. Our mission is to bring transparency to acquisitions. So one of the things that I noticed as a previous founder myself was I think a lot of founders get into starting a company because they want to exit their business. I think exits to a great extent are seen as like a badge of honor. Like a founder can think of themselves as even more successful if they have a great exit. And so I think a lot of people who get into the space think about exits early, as they should. That's important. To plan for the exit from day one is something that I always talk about. But what I noticed is that unless you've been through an exit before, or unless you work in the mergers and acquisitions space, the acquisition space, there isn't really a place to understand the mechanics of an acquisition or what's important or how they work. And so the mission of the podcast was really to bring transparency to acquisitions for founders. So founders could have
Amazing.
a place where they could go to learn about what's important in an acquisition and how they could get the value of the acquisition that they're looking for. So the whole point of the podcast is I bring guests onto the podcast who can give value to the founders to help them achieve that value in their business that they're looking for. So when they exit, they make the money that they're looking to make at the end of the day.
That's an amazing mission. And I think it's a great podcast. Thank you for sharing that. Those are my main questions for today. Thank you for all the value that you provided. I totally support your mission, and I believe you're the coolest one, the coolest lawyer out there in SaaS. And I'm grateful for how you help the community. Hope to see you in person soon at an event. And let's stay in touch.
Yeah, I'm coming for that Tekpon award. Look out for me.
Yeah. You should, and we should have an award for you.
That would be amazing. Thank you, Christian. I appreciate it.